All right, guys, Tuesday morning. I'm here in my room today. Also serves as our mini office. There is a puzzle, I feel like Ellen DeGeneres, that we have not completed for the past month. Maybe it's time. But hey, I want to dive into, as you saw in the email, Matthew 14, which highlights Jesus walking on the water and then Peter actually stepping out of the boat as well. I'm sure it's familiar to you. It's obviously a passage that is common in club talks. And just to remind us in context, this comes right after the feeding of the 5,000, which would have been such a mountaintop experience for everyone. It would have been a celebratory situation. And if you turn back to that, the irony there is it's over, and Jesus is like, hey, disciples, you need to go away, and I'm going to get rid of the crowds. And I'm sure they're like, okay. It might remind you if you've been to summer camp where after the say so, everyone wants to hang around, no one wants to leave. And yet Jesus is like, hey, we're moving on. So the disciples get in a boat, and Jesus says, you need to cross over the lake. And yet it is a storm. And so he asked them to get in a boat in the midst of bad weather, in a small boat. You saw the picture of what a boat would look like where, if there's a significant wind and waves, it would have been really challenging. It would have been terrifying, honestly. And then Jesus does what he always tends to do is after he's around a lot of crowds, he goes and retreats and spends some time with the Lord, which again is just a remarkable characteristic of Jesus. When he seemingly has so much power, he habitually goes and reflects and spends time with his Father. And so then in Matthew 14:22, we see that a short while after that, Jesus comes walking on the water. And Peter, as per usual, he's the bold one. He says, hey, Jesus, in verse 28, he says, Lord, if it is you, command me to come onto the water. Jesus says, come. And here's what stuck in my head. I don't know if this is going to correlate or connect for all of you guys, but the reality is all of us have been placed in a figurative boat. We've been put up with a few people. Maybe it's family back home, or maybe it's roommates in Clemson. And that's kind of where we are. That's our situation. I hope for many of us, it's a good situation. I hope we're cared for, we're encouraged, we have some fellowship and community. But that's not a guarantee. It's probably getting frustrating in some ways. You may feel like it's not that encouraging. You may feel like you're really missing out on what you need based on the boat you've been in. And yet, even in the midst of quarantine, I think that Jesus is calling us to focus on him, to look to him, and get out of the boat in some way. And now I'm obviously not suggesting that we go and socialize with a bunch of people. But what I am suggesting is, again, as we've gotten comfortable in certain situations, as we've gotten comfortable in a routine, what does it look like for Jesus to call you out of that? And what does it look like for us to fix our eyes on him? Because what we see here is Peter's doing fine until he takes his eyes off Jesus and he looks around to the wind and the waves. He takes his focus off of the one who really has power to protect him, and to give him courage and allow him to step out of what's comfortable. Another parallel, I read a story the other day where this famous tightrope walker, Carl Waller, I believe. If you try to look it up, you may not find it. But he's a famous tightrope walker who, when he was in his 70s, he had done tightropes, amazing feats his entire life. He traveled down to Puerto Rico to do kind of maybe a final act. And on live television, he actually falls off the tightrope and dies. It was pretty significant in the 70s, of course. And they ended up interviewing his wife, and they said, hey, was there anything that was different? What changed? I mean, we can't even imagine why he fell. Like, he was so good. And his wife's response was, it was really weird. In the months leading up to this challenge, he really began obsessing over not falling, which he had never done his entire life. He had always focused on the goal. He had his eyes fixed on a point in the distance. And yet this time, his mind was consumed by failing. And so I don't know, that might make sense for us that as our world has changed a lot, we may be switching our focus instead of keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. I hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for checking it out today. Bye.